living now all the time, and the passage of time is irrelevant anyway. We're always here. Not very many people are capable of doing that. I've been on a conscious spiritual path now since I was 14. That's 37 years. I'm glad to tell you, I'm a little proud to share with you, that I have progressed to the point that I can stay fully conscious for about 90 seconds a day.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've made great progress. I'm shooting for 100 seconds a day next year. Now, the fact is, it's a constant challenge. Constantly bringing yourself back to consciousness, to what's real. Unless we bring that consciousness to it, nothing's ever going to shift. Because we are going to wind up becoming little models of whatever was modeled for us in childhood. And it doesn't change unless we bring consciousness to it. If we bring consciousness to it, there's nothing else we need to do. We don't have to fix anything. There's one more thing we need to do. We need to bring our consciousness to it, and we need to bring love and forgiveness to it, as I said earlier. You need to forgive yourself, and you need to forgive your parents. Many people, as I said earlier, even 40s, 50s, and 60s are still blaming their parents. And the reason we do that, the reason people hold themselves as victims, is because victims aren't responsible. So I get to avoid responsibility. It's not my fault. Yes, I know I'm not doing anything useful with my life, but it's not my fault. And so you'll hear people say, well, this happened to me as a child, this happened to me, I'm this way because of that. And yet you could find two people who'd gone through almost exactly the same circumstances, and one of them was crippled that way, and the other one used it as a springboard to become the biggest, most beautiful, brightest version of themselves possible. Every one of us has that capability. Every one of us has within genius. But we need to be willing to focus on what we are passionate about, regardless of what anybody else thinks. We need to be willing to let go of the masks and the costumes and actually be who we are, not who we think we should be, or who other people want us to be, or expect us to be. In the U.S., Thanksgiving is coming up in less than a week, and a lot of people are going to go home, and no matter how they normally function in life, when they go home, they're going to revert back to being who they were in childhood. We do that because that's how these people expect me to be, so that's how I'm going to be. Probably the single most generous thing that we can do with another human being is to give them the freedom, not that we can really prevent them, but be willing to hold them in a way that they are capable of being anybody they choose to be in every moment, instead of holding them as, I know who you are. And often we're interacting with people from the I know who you are thing. And so people will say, I knew you were going to say that. Really? I didn't know I was going to say that. How could you know that? It's possible some one of these times I might say something different. Stop believing you know how it's going to be. You know how somebody is and who somebody is. Deepak Chopra, in his retelling of the Knights of the Round Table story, illustrates this very well. Merlin the magician is about to go on a long journey, and the king, King Arthur, you don't have a lot of friends when you're the king. Everybody's a subject, right? It's this hierarchical structure. You don't have a lot of close friends because everybody's your subject, and maybe they secretly want your throne. And so King Arthur's one true friend is Merlin the magician. And Merlin comes to Arthur and says, Arthur, I'm going on a long journey. I might be gone for 20 years. And remember, there were no airplanes back then, or trains, or automobiles. You went on horseback. It took you a much longer time to get from point A to point B. So he said, I'm going to be gone maybe for 20 years. And Arthur, understandably, saddened by the news, was even sadder when he got Merlin's reply to his next question. Because Arthur responded by saying, will you even know me when you return? Merlin said, no, my lord, I won't. But then he added, but that's because I'll have the pleasure and the privilege of getting to know the man you've become. But we often don't think of it that way. See, if you go back to wherever you were raised and haven't been there for 20 years, you may interact with the people that you re-meet as if they're who they were 20 years ago. And unfortunately, some of them may be. But let's not assume that or take that for granted. Let's give people the opportunity to actually demonstrate how they've grown and changed. Most importantly, give yourself that opportunity in every moment. Bring your consciousness, the light of your consciousness, to whatever's going on. Understand that we have choices in every single moment. In every single moment we get to choose. We are always choosing. If you refuse to choose, you've just made a choice. There's no way to avoid choosing. And if you choose to be a victim, you've made the single most disempowering choice that you can make. Which brings me back to what I shared with you, I believe it was yesterday. In every area of your life that's important to you, that you may not care about how you look or how you dress or, many things. It may not be important to you. They may be relatively low on your priority scale. But the things that are important to you, decide what you're committed to. Is your health really important to you? What are you committed to? There's no right or wrong answers, but if you're not clear yourself about what you're committed to, how are you going to create what you say you want if it's not easy? And the things that are most valuable to us are usually not easy. It's only going to happen if you're committed. Why is that? What is it that makes that true? What is it about growth? Well, have you ever known people that look like they were in terribly difficult or uncomfortable circumstances, yet weren't willing to change? They weren't willing to do anything else. Why is that? Well, it's been said, better the devil we know than the one we don't. Fear is the reason why. And so rather than changing, people stay in what's been come to be called their comfort zone. Don't mistake this. The fact that it's called the comfort zone doesn't mean that in any way they're actually comfortable. Not physically, maybe not financially.
The discomfort zone.
Yeah, they're called their comfort zone because it's what they know. And so they're willing to keep suffering the way they've been suffering rather than face the unknown, the fear of the unknown. They stay stuck where they are. But where do we actually grow? If you stay stuck with what you already know, is there any growth possible? It can't happen. The only way we can grow is if we're willing to push ourselves, at least to the edge, at least coming into contact with the unknown, if not beyond that point. We have to move to where we're not comfortable to be able to grow. We have to. And so those people that insist on staying comfortable because of fear, because of an unwillingness to face their fears, they are screwed. So a very, very powerful piece for me has been what I shared with you a little while ago, learning to ask, when you feel fear coming up, ask yourself a simple question. What's the worst that could happen to me? What if I went ahead and applied for that job anyway, or wrote that book anyway, or asked that person for a date anyway. Whatever it might be. Another example of this, I had very good friends who had spiritual teachers, a couple that had been together for many years, but they met at a conference in Europe. She was European, he was American. And they'd spent several days getting to know each other at this conference. And there was a strong attraction, but no one had said anything. It hadn't been acknowledged verbally that there was anything going on. And he got on the elevator on Sunday with his bags in the hotel to leave, having not said anything to this woman, having no plans to stay in touch, to see her again, because he was afraid. He was afraid of being rejected. So he wasn't going to do anything about it. He was going to go home and maybe pray that he would run into her sometime. But on his way down to the lobby, she got on the elevator. She got on the elevator, and she had bigger cojones than he did. Because when they reached the lobby, she said, "I'd really like to see you again. Can we stay in touch?" And their relationship, which has lasted many years, may have never happened because of his fear. Fortunately, they weren't both crippled by their own fear, because he was. How many opportunities are we passing by? If only opportunities for our own growth, because we play small. We play small because we don't want to fail. We're afraid what it means if we fail, so we don't try. I mean, that's the recipe, by the way. Surefire, guaranteed recipe for never failing again. Simply never try. Now, see, I studied finance in college. And in finance, the first rule of finance is there's a risk-return trade-off. So if you buy government treasury bills, you get a relatively small payout. Because theoretically, I'm not so sure I believe in the U.S. government, but theoretically the U.S. government will pay the bill. You will get your money back. It's a surefire, safe investment. If you invest in something that's much more speculative, you will expect a higher rate of return because there's more risk involved. So the more risk you're willing to take, the greater the payoff is. I learned this in college, first law of finance, but I quickly realized that it could equally be called the first law of life. In life, there's a risk-return trade-off. You want to play it safe? Fine. But don't expect to accomplish anything significant in your life. Don't expect anyone to remember you after you're gone. I mean, maybe they'll say, "Oh, he was a nice guy. She was a lovely person." But I read something which stuck with me 20 years ago. And it was a Jesuit scholar, and it struck me because this was a Christian, and yet what he said was, philosopher, what he said was, the only real sin is in not maximizing your potential. The idea, from his perspective, was that God has given you this potential, and if you don't do everything you can with it, that's a sin. Well, whether you believe that your gifts were given by God, or that however you got them, doesn't matter. I read that and I thought, yeah, I want to maximize my own potential. I want to help other people do the same thing. And that means, again, no playing small. No willingness to let fear stop me. And so my internship program involved a public speaking component. It's about health. What's that have to do with health? Well, the only way you're ever going to be as healthy as possible is to face your fears. It's to stop having fear prevent you from being who you can be. And so these people were required to stand up and give 4 presentations to the group. And some of them, it was terribly difficult for them to do. I had 2 or 3 people that almost left the program because they didn't want to do it. But they did. And I've heard from several. One ex-intern sent me a CD and said, Loren, I never could have done this before. This is a CD of me giving a lecture for a group of people. Never could have done that before. There's another one that almost left the program, was deathly afraid. I mean, it was a huge scene to get her to do this. And now she goes around and gives presentations. She's moved more into being fully expressed, fully who she is, because she was willing, she was forced, she was willing to face her fears. I take my group to the beach, and some people would say, I'm not going to go in. I'm afraid of the ocean. I would say, give me your hand. Let's go in together. Okay. I was a pretty good swimmer. I played water polo. I was life-saving. I've got a lot of experience in the ocean. You'll be fine. And I would work on these people sometimes to get them to go into the waves with me. And then they would say, I did it. And that's how it feels. And for many people, it's this. One of the things that comes up when someone says, I think I want to quit. This is too hard. I'll usually tell them, look, if you can make it through the process by just staying present, and you get to the end, you're going to feel so good that you accomplished something challenging. And the more often we face our fears and do those things that seem so difficult for us, the easier it becomes. Eventually we get to the point where fear comes up, we say, okay, no big deal. I'm going to do it anyway. One of the things I would do for myself is I realized I was afraid of something, I would make myself do it. To just bust through as many of those things as possible. Fear still comes up, but it rarely stops me from doing something anymore. Because I've learned, most of the time, it's not that big a deal. There's much more we can cover on this subject, but this is a good start. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thanks for your time.
That was profound. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. We'll continue with that if you'd like.